You are listening to an exclusive interview on Bass Musician Magazine. The interview starts now.
Hey everybody, this is Raul for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist, singer, songwriter, a whole list of achievements, Byron Isaacs.
Hello. Thank you
Hi.
for having me.
Thank you for taking time to chat with us, Byron. Starting from the beginning, as we usually do in these conversations, tell us a little bit how you got started in music and in bass.
Well, I think like a lot of kids, I was into the Beatles as a young man, and I was drawn immediately to Paul's bass lines. I think the first time there were two songs on Abbey Road that I was like, what the heck is going on with this song? She's So Heavy.
Mm-hmm.
The bass line on that just knocked me out. I couldn't believe how cool that was. Oh, and Come Together. And then, of course, on the other side, Something. It's just magic. And even now, I marvel at the invention, that inspiration that Paul had. Like, how on earth did he take this beautiful ballad, which would have been it would have been a hit anyway. And how did he have the hubris, not just the inspiration, but the hubris to play so melodically and with such bold flourishes all over this beautiful pop song? It's astonishing to me that he even thought to do that. Like, my usual tendency when I see a beautiful song is to kind of, let it be and not like put my big old stamp on it. You know what I mean? And here he transforms the song into something otherworldly that has, it's got so many, it's like a plethora of delights now. You have the beautiful song, you have George's beautiful singing, and then you've got this undercurrent. It's a subtext, I just couldn't believe it. It was total magic. And so I really wanted to play bass, and I got a garage band. It was really a basement band with a couple of buddies of mine who happened to be in the jazz band at the school. And I didn't really know anything about jazz, but the guy who was playing drums was a great tenor sax player, and he just wanted to play rock drums for fun. Our lead guitar player was a trumpet player in the jazz band. And I really didn't know anything, but I had gotten this Telecaster bass as a gift from my brother-in-law, my sister's husband. My sister's older than me. And I was 15 years old, and I get for my birthday this big old Telecaster bass. It's the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And so I'm going in there, and they taught me the blues scale. And so it gave me some Who records. So then I'm checking out John Entwistle too, and all that stuff. And I mean, listening to some of the cassettes now of what we did with that band, it was like the most abysmal bass playing ever. It was basically me just running up and down the blues scale. Like, it was crazy, but I was turned on and I was actually making music. And meanwhile, I was becoming friendly with these guys in the jazz band. Another friend of mine who is now also living in Brooklyn, Matt Pavolka, is a brilliant jazz bass player. And at the time, he was a young trombone player who was playing some bass for fun. But he really wanted to be playing trombone again, and they had him playing bass in the jazz band. And so he said, "Hey man, you want to take my place as bass in the jazz band?" I was like, "I don't know jazz. Was that like Benny Goodman or something?" He's like, "No, man." And he hands me this cassette. He burned me a cassette, or it burned.
Yeah.
He taped me a cassette. One side, it was a 90, Max L 90, and on one side was Charles Mingus, Blues and Roots. And on the other side was Charles Mingus Presents Charles Mingus. So it's these two Mingus records. And I had never heard anything like that in my life. And I remember I was kind of going through a little bit of a Metallica phase for a minute there. And I just loved the dark power of the band, this visceral energy that it had. It was really like hitting my 15-year-old soul in just the right spot, kind of. I still loved the Beatles and the Who, but I was like, there was something about the power and the darkness of Metallica that was really getting me at the time. Mm-hmm. And my mother actually can testify to this. I put on this Mingus record. Blues and Roots is the first one I put on. It was queued up to that side. And as the first howling notes of Wednesday night prayer meeting came out of those speakers, and Mingus screaming over the top of his band and the horns just wailing, I couldn't believe the power. And I said out loud, "This is like Metallica, but better." Yeah. And it really was. It was like the hands of God came through the skies, through the clouds, and grabbed me by the throat and shook me. And I was like, I have to play this music.
Mhm.
This is it. Like, and I have to play that crazy upright bass. Like, what is that about? So I joined the jazz band and went headlong into jazz, completely out of left field. And it was like it was the fervor of a convert. I was completely taken over, and jazz became my life. And I didn't really listen to anything on the radio, anything that was happening. I missed so much stuff in the 90s. Like Nirvana. I missed Nirvana.
Yeah.
I started listening to them after Kurt died. And I was like, oh my God, there's all this stuff going on. But my life at the time was just jazz. I was just soaking it up. And I decided I was going to move to New York and like try to make it in jazz in New York. You know, that's where it was happening. And I went and worked on cruise ships. I left college. Actually, my mom and I were both in college at the time. I'd gotten into Indiana University in the jazz department with David Baker. And my mom, meanwhile, was getting her PhD. And we were living in a tiny little studio apartment, living on her student loans. And so we were really poor. Her coursework ended, and it was time for her to start working on her dissertation. And when your coursework ends, so do the loans. There's no more money. So one of us had to go to work, and she needed to do her dissertation. So I left college and went out on the cruise ships, got a real education. You got to get your reading together. Yeah. You're playing like all the styles. At that time, older couples were still dancing to jazz music, you know, but like foxtrots and swing and stuff like this. It was a fantastic education for me as a bass player to also learn that it all comes from dance music. And the greats who brought jazz from being dance music into being listening music were steeped in having played in dance bands. And I learned that, for instance, if I was playing a 2-beat, people would dance. And as soon as I started walking, people would sit down. And they didn't even know why they were doing it. They couldn't tell you. They would just say, I don't know. It just didn't feel right. It would be the closest they could come to saying it. And I started to realize the power of my role outside of just the bass being a method for artistic exploration and all that. There was this very visceral connection to people and the way that people want to move and the way people breathe. And bass has a tremendous amount of very subtle power. And I know that was part of what I was feeling from Mingus, but of course he was on overdrive. And so playing in these dance bands, I got a whole new appreciation for the power of the bass. So then I ended up moving to New York in '94, hit the ground trying to run as a bass player. But, man, I rolled up with $4,500 of saved cash, that I socked away in the meantime while I was helping my mom get through school and finish her dissertation. And that runs out fast. I found myself working some really, really rough jobs, including I was at the Strand bookstore in the warehouse unloading trucks. It was like, man, and not really. I had $10 a day for food after I figured out rent and utilities. I had $10 a day to eat, and that was it. And one time I got mugged and I lost my whole paycheck, and I was scrambling to figure out how to even make rent that month. This is where the genesis of sort of the idea of the disappearing man came from. It's like, man, in New York, you can really disappear. It's very easy to slip through the cracks. Mm-hmm. And you can look around and see around you people who really are slipping through the cracks. And it can be very scary. And that first year in New York was terrifying. I just kept at it and was very, very lucky. Things started to catch on. And eventually I was able to quit my final day job and just try to make it as a musician. The whole way it was just fraught with terror. But as far as the jazz thing, so I moved to New York to play jazz, was completely in a jazz space. But what's funny is when I got here, all the musicians my age, there was kind of a fad going on at the time in New York that passed. But what was happening at the time is all the jazz musicians my age, the young lions, they were into 1940 bebop. It was like a return to the roots, just like bebop, man, nothing else. Mm-hmm. And people were showing up with period correct brown suits and their fedoras on, really dressing the part, as if they walked off a movie set. Saxophone players, they wouldn't play Selmer Mark VIs. They'd play balanced actions because those were period correct. Like, I mean, these guys were taking it like out there. I wanted to play modern acoustic jazz. I wanted to play acoustic jazz.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily want to play fusion, although there was some fusion that I liked too. There were lines that were being blurred with bands like Quest.
Yeah.
It was modern acoustic fusion. There was some, even Steps Ahead and stuff like that I was into. But man, you couldn't be playing that stuff at that time, not at my age and at my skill level. My peers were into this other thing. I would show up. I'm a small guy. I got small hands. I met Eddie Gomez. His hands are the same size as mine. He's got famously small hands. I have the exact same hands. We had a little laugh over it. He's not going to go up on a gig without an amp either. So I'd have my amp on the stage, or I'd show up with an amp, and the drummers would, like, I don't want to see that thing. Get that thing out of here. Mm-hmm. And of course, they're playing like so loud. They're playing 3 times louder than guys used to play back in the day. And so I found the whole thing to be like kind of confining, especially because I wanted to play new, original acoustic jazz. I didn't want to be part of a time capsule, I found it to be creatively stifling and interpersonally stifling. Like, it was like a lot of folded arms and like judging going on. I was like, man, like, what's going on here? Like, this is not the creative New York vortex of brilliance that I was expecting to walk into. Yeah. So anyway, I was recommended by a college friend to play with a mutual friend of his, who's a singer-songwriter. And I was like, all right, well, that's cool. I used to like that kind of stuff. Like, let's check it out. And so I started playing, in his band, and it was kind of a rock band. And I was like, oh, this is fun. I mean, I'm sure I was like, my feel was all weird and my sound was all weird. And I pulled out my old electric bass again, and I was like, wow, this is kind of a toy. Like, my head was like so not in the right space. Yeah. But I did discover that the vibe was so welcoming and inviting, and there were no folded arms. And in fact, people were really into personal expression as an instrumentalist, and like what was happening in the singer-songwriter scene in New York at the time was actually this great blossoming. That now, a lot of us look back to what was happening in the mid-'90s in New York in the singer-songwriter scene as being this golden era. Mm-hmm. And of course, I didn't know this, but I did know that it felt really exciting, and I felt like there was more of a vehicle for my inspiration there. So I started playing with lots of rock bands. I even played in a couple of punk bands. I met people through my other jazz friends again who were doing like, salsa bands. And I started just branching out and playing lots of different kinds of music. But I really found myself falling into the rock and singer-songwriter realm a lot. And then I heard a Suzanne Vega record that just completely knocked me out. Like, her poetry mixed with her music was just such an incredible blend. She had such a striking, clear voice, unique. Like, no one sounded like that. Nobody thought like that. Like, I couldn't believe how strong and how unreducible it was, like a diamond, I became so transfixed with that I was like, man, I want to learn how to do that. I want to write songs. I've been writing instrumental tunes. I've been writing some music that friends of mine in the bands that I was in would put lyrics to. But I was like, man, there's something just crazy about this, like the union of those two. Like, if you can get it right, like Suzanne Vega. Like, she was like the one who inspired me to want to do it myself. And of course, since then, now I've marveled at Dylan and Chris Christopherson and the whole list of the pantheon of great songwriters. But Suzanne Vega was the one that got me the first time, and that was only a few years later. That's probably 96 or so. I've been writing songs now ever since.
Well, and kind of fast forward, because you'd made mention of The Disappearing Man. That is your solo album, just released this last June. What I would say, a lot of what you're mentioning, I actually perceive it in the music on your album. So I pick up on kind of a McCartney kind of lyrical approach to your playing. Some of the vocals remind me very much of Beatle kind of vocals.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so I'm kind, and and I always like to hear again from the musician itself, because I think the listener, we tend to do something that maybe it's fair, maybe it's not fair, but you know how when people eat food, they go, "Oh, this tastes like chicken,"
Sure.
and so when we listen to things, we'll start kind of making mental comparisons, going, "Wow, that sounds, kind of like." But and what I find, especially in our population, any comparison to the Beatles is usually favorable. It's like frog legs talking like chicken is actually a compliment to frog legs, because people like chicken. So
Sure. Yeah.
so
Yeah, I'm
tell
with
us
you.
what I also found it to be, and you'd mentioned kind of the general vibe. I found it to be very reflective, kind of looking at life in itself, and it made me want to kind of reflect as I was listening to it. I'm going, oh wow, I'm picking up on this, and I know there's a lot of deep thoughts. I tend to be a person, and it's interesting that you mentioned when you were writing, doing the music, and not so much the lyrics. I tend to kind of tune out lyrics.
Mhm.
I focus on patterns and notes, and I derive a sensation and a feeling from them. And then maybe if I go back afterwards, I'll listen again and hear the lyrics and go, oh, okay. I was feeling the whole thing at the beginning. I was right on it there.
Oh, that's great. I was going to say that I listen the exact same way, and it's probably because I really fell in love when I really fell in love with music. It was instrumental music, and so even now I tend to do the same thing, right? I get taken by the music. The music will take me on the ride first, and then it's on the subsequent listens that I actually dig what's happening with the lyrics. Really, I spend as much time as I do on lyrics just for people's subsequent listening, really.
Yeah.
It's like, even still now, to me, the main ride is the music. And the lyrics just, they have to give more to that. They have to be there to support it. At the very least, they just can't drag it down. But for me, the main idea is the music itself. And then the next idea is the lyrical, it's like, to me, the lyrics are almost the accompaniment to the music.
Mm-hmm.
But I put 5 times more time into the lyrics than I do into the music. The music comes much more easily and naturally, and I really work on those lyrics.
Gotcha.
But for me, what's more important, like what gets me, or equally important, but what's the initial desire to the thing that I'm hearing that I want to put across is always a musical idea first. Mm-hmm. I'm a musician first and a lyricist second.
Gotcha. Well, and your inspiration for The Disappearing Man, and kind of, I've kind of given you my interpretation. Tell us a little bit about what you were thinking when you were doing it.
Well, I feel like, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of people who truly are disappearing in our world today. And it's not just individuals who are disappearing. The whole notion of humanity is disappearing. I mean, honestly, look at, like, now corporations are people. They're actually, if you think about it, now that they're considered to be legally people, they have more rights than humans, because you can't put a corporation in jail. There's because it's not a feeling creature, it's not subject to the same punishments that humans are. And so in that way, they're actually freer to do a lot more harm in the world than humans are. And they've been given that freedom. Money concerns seem to have taken over people's fears and worries and desires on mass scale. I think we don't even know it, but we're ceding our humanity all the time. We have a problem in our culture right now. And we're all like, we don't realize it, but we're fueling our own disappearance, our own obsolescence. As corporations are free and manufacturers are free to mechanize labor with robots and all of this, human labor is becoming less and less in demand. And we have more and more people, and we're not willing to then compensate. Like, if there aren't jobs for people, eventually, if machines and computers can actually, like, you can extrapolate to a place in science fiction, people do all the time, to a place where there are no more jobs for humans. But if we don't change our culture to allow for people to have another way to sustain themselves or to make money, to live, then what are we doing? We're completely devaluing human life, completely. And it's happening right now. Human life is being devalued on a consistent daily basis. We are, in our culture, we're being dehumanized. We're disappearing. Gotcha. So that's part of the theme too. Being a disappearing man, however, also, or woman or human. I mean, I would have said human, but it doesn't have as good a ring to it. There are positive sides to that notion too, of removing your selfish nature. You know, becoming a parent, you have to sort of disappear in a certain way because you have to prioritize someone else's life above your own. And so that's a different kind of disappearing that I think is actually a very healthy kind of disappearing. And I think therein, that nugget might point the way to our eventual salvation as a people, hopefully. I really hope so. But right now, I think we're kind of in a pickle.
And we can only hope that part of the disappearing may be more of an evolution and progressing into a higher state, if you will. We can only hope.
I sure hope so.
Yeah. Getting back to the CD, I did notice, again, I know predominantly bass is your thing, but a lot of acoustic guitar.
I did. Well, I mean, I also had a great band. Okay. I had a great guitar player named Chris Masterson, who's been out with his wife, Eleanor Whitmore, as the Mastersons, and also as part of Steve Earle's backup band for the last few years. And they both appear on the record, but Eleanor in a couple of songs and Chris on the entire record, with the exception of the first song, Losing You, which was recorded later. I played a lot of the rhythm guitar stuff. A lot of times Chris would come in and even double that on some of the songs, but usually it was me on rhythm acoustic and Chris playing all of the beautiful lead stuff. And his guitar playing on this record is just tremendous. I mean, I think it's a tour de force for Chris Masterson.
And bass-wise, how are you getting your sound?
Oh man, we did all kinds of things. You know, you'll hear there's a lot of fuzz bass on there, and so that's a combination of, like, you know, different songs had different fuzzes on them. You know, I love the Electro Harmonics Big Muff, so I had an old Russian one. There was the fuzz on a lot of it. My engineer producer Hector Castillo had some Death by Audio pedals that we used that got some really wackadoo sounds. We also had an Electro Harmonics bass micro synth for Crazy Love. We used that for the octave division, the distortion, and for the attack delay. So that got used heavily on that song. And I feel like, I'm sure that there were some other methods, because, you know, we didn't want to use the same sound on every song. We were really trying to sculpt a broad sonic palette. But yeah, I love bass fuzz. But for the most part, there wasn't much. There was some reamping, but not much. Most of the bass on the record was direct. I am a fan of both. I love direct bass. And I do love a good amp tone, and I like them mixed together sometimes. And, you know, I think that they're both wonderful colors to have in your palette. But I'm a big believer in good direct bass. If it's well recorded, that can really like sit in the track just right. And I like bass to be forward. You know, I like the old Motown records. I like the way records were made back in the day when the bass was the loudest thing. You know, I like direct bass for that reason. And, you know, a lot of those Motown records, the bass was direct. I just recently got this Acme direct box. It's a replica of. It's called the Wolf box, and it's a replica of the DI that they had in the Snake Pit that James Jamerson used in Detroit, the Motown studios, and that thing is fantastic. In general, I'm more than happy for that to just be the bass tone, but every now and then you want to get a little bit of the air and grit from an amp too. Gotcha. You know, just depends what else is going on.
And what bass you playing, instrument-wise?
For the most part, if I'm playing electric bass, which these days, lately, it's been mostly that. Although, you know, like when I was playing with Levon Helm, it was all upright. The bass that I play the most, actually, I can show you, is a 65 P bass. which is here's my beast. It's well loved, well beat up,
Yeah.
by people previous to me, but and it's a beauty. It's all original, and you can see that the pick guard's cracking and stuff. But it's all still there, and man, this thing just sounds tremendous, and it's my best pal. So mostly a lot of that. I still use my first bass. This is my Telecaster, and it's got. You can see it was at one point it was routed badly, mind you.
Oh man!
And there was a Gibson humbucker in it when I got it, an EBO pickup, and it actually sounded pretty cool with that in it. But the string spacing was narrower, and so the low E string was getting lost. And at a certain point, I was like, I can't have this. So, and this is like in the late '90s, and I called Lindy Fralin, and he answered the phone personally.
He does,
and he made this pickup for me. So it's like the original single coil that had been in it, but with double pole pieces. So I still play that quite a bit. And then there was a lot of this instrument on Disappearing Man. This is a 66 Guild Starfire bass, and it's a real beauty, and it's in pretty good shape. It's in better shape than my 65, although you can see that there's some buckle wear back there, and some of the binding was disintegrating, and I had it repaired a little bit. But this is a real beauty. And with the double pickup, it's I really find it to just be a wonderful sounding instrument with nice decay, a thump attack like an upright, and then a quick decay, which I like. I like decay, I'm not that into instruments with infinite sustain. Decay to me is part of the breathing of a note, So those are some of the main ones. On tour, I'll often use I'll play a jazz bass on tour a lot, especially if it's going to be large rooms, because the sound of that cuts. When you're playing a big place, you need clarity. And for a recording, I like the fat, fuzzy, hairy P bass kind of vibe. But for if you're playing in large rooms, that can just get blurred out. So usually I'll play Fender Jazz when I'm on tour.
Looking ahead, you just released this solo album. Usually musicians are like sharks. There's always some perpetual motion going on. What are you planning for the near future?
I also have a band that I've had for a few years called Lost Leaders. And the day after my CD release party for Disappearing Man, we went into the studio to start cutting a new full-length album with Lost Leaders. So we're in the middle of recording that right now with a producer named David Barron, who contributed string arrangements and synth to the Lumineers record that I played on, Cleopatra. And so now I'm working with him on our Lost Leaders record, which I'm really excited about. And then in the fall, going back in with the Lumineers to work on their third full-length record. So that's really exciting. So yeah, it is constant motion. But, I don't really know any different. I've been a freelancer, for all these years. I really can't sit still very long. It drives me nuts.
Gotcha. Well, and especially I think the general philosophy to live in New York, you have to be hustling and have multiple hustles going on at once. It's just expected.
Living in New York is a great enabler of workaholism. We're all workaholics here. Yeah. It really is true.
And if people want to follow, because you've got so much going on, the best place to look, ByronIsaacs.com?
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent.
I'm trying to write little blog entries, too, of little stories from the road and stuff, too. So, periodically there'll be new stuff to read. So I'm working on trying to be good about that. But,
Very nice. Well, Byron, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to share all your insights. We're really excited about Disappearing Men. Certainly check it out in depth. Folks, you've seen him here, bassist, songwriter, singer, Byron Isaacs, coming to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks for bassing out with us here on bassmusicianmagazine.com.